Okay, let's take a look at some shade-tolerant evergreens. And the first one here is the Japanese Plum Yew, Cephalotaxus harringtonia. And this particular specimen is about 4.5 feet tall. I purchased this from a local nursery, and it's the tree form of Japanese Plum Yew. There are other forms that are common at Home Depot, like the ground cover form, which kind of creeps along the ground. Or sometimes you'll see the upright form at nurseries, which forms a very columnar shape. But this is the more pyramidal, symmetrical tree form. And I believe there are male and female versions of this tree. This particular one is a male, so it doesn't have the quote-unquote plum or the fruit that gets produced by this yew. And as the genus name would suggest, Cephalotaxus, it's related to yews, which have a genus name of Taxus, but it's not exactly the same. And whereas deer will eat a regular yew of the genus Taxus, they will not eat the plum yew of Cephalotaxus. So if you have a shady spot and you also have a lot of deer around, you may want to think about Cephalotaxus harringtonia. It's very pest-free, should be tolerant of most soil conditions, but it does prefer part shade at least, and that's where I have it here, tucked in a bunch of other much taller conifers and also kind of getting shade from a house. You can get Cephalotaxus harringtonia Japanese Plum Yew in tree form from wilsonbrothersgardens.com online, or you may find it at a nursery locally like I did, but it's probably going to be a specialty nursery where you find it. Now, I don't have this one in the ground yet, but this is a Akuba Broadleaf evergreen, obviously. This is not a conifer. The Latin name is Akuba japonica, I believe, so Japanese Akuba, and this particular cultivar is the serratifolia. There are some variegated varieties that have yellow spots in some cases, or other types of variegation, but I wanted the solid green leaf because that's the theme I'm going with in my evergreen collection, is just a wall of green. These Akubas could be relatively slow growing compared to some of the evergreens that you've seen me grow. And the other thing you have to watch out for, as with all broadleaf evergreens, is the multi-trunk tendency. You can see here I've trimmed away 2 or 3 subsidiary trunks that would have interfered with my single trunk plan. And now I've got this one main leader coming up here that's, I can really trace it all the way to the top of the plant with the thickest stem for the most part. Maybe over the years I may go this direction, but if you want to do the same thing I'm doing of maintaining one dominant trunk with side branches coming off of it, you kind of have to let it grow and then at the end of the growing season decide where you want it to grow next year, I believe. So I'm going to let this Akuba grow for now and try to get it in the ground soon. As you can see, I've got it in a pot, but can't really plant now because I'm into summer and it wouldn't be ideal. So instead I've got it in this kind of shaded area with some other broadleaf evergreens that I did not get in the ground. I won't go through all those now, but this is the most shade tolerant of all. Possibly the most shade tolerant evergreen in my entire collection, Akuba. This is the serratifolia cultivar. Moving on. Okay, here we have an Illicium parviflorum is the Latin name, and it's Illicium is what they usually call it. Another broadleaf evergreen. It's pretty shade tolerant, although I have it in a part shade location. And I think Tennessee and Zone 7 would be perhaps the northern limit of this species' ability to handle cold. We'll see how it does this winter. But as before with other broadleaf evergreens, I've trimmed away some subsidiary trunks at the bottom to try to establish a single trunk, and over time one of these will become the main leader with side branches coming off of it. And that's just a characteristic of broadleaf evergreens, is they are not naturally pyramidal, they form bushes. So if you want height as opposed to a spreading bush, you're going to have to do a little pruning. But Illicium, which you can find online, I think I got this from thetreecenter.com. Should be fairly shade tolerant, and it is evergreen. Alright, I couldn't mention shade tolerant trees without mentioning the Thuja Green Giant, which I've talked about a lot. This particular specimen is probably too big to get in the screen, but I don't know, it's about 20 feet tall now. But surprisingly, Thuja Green Giant is pretty shade tolerant. And let me show you how I know this. I want to move over here for a second. Around these trees. And I lost a Thuja Green Giant in this spot right here to a root rot. And that was definitively the cause of losing the Thuja Green Giant. So watch out for root rot if it's around. But this spot was occupied by a Thuja Green Giant. Now I've got this Hong Kong rose here, and I want to show you the Thuja Green Giant growing right next to it has full foliage. So this foliage was completely shaded by the other Thuja Green Giant, and this cryptomeria over here, and this emerald green arbor vitae. Now take a look at the emerald green arbor vitae. The spots that were completely shaded, the foliage died out, and that's why if you look at emerald green arbor vitaes, they have a dead brown center because they lose that foliage. As soon as it gets shaded, the tree decides, I don't need that anymore. It's dying, and away it goes. Here's another one over here. See that? The shaded part is gone. But look at right next to it. Thuja Green Giant, equally shaded. And look how green it is, even on the inside of the tree, where it's very shady. Still a lot of green in there. So Thuja Green Giant, fast growing, big, and pretty shade tolerant. I mean, these trees get a lot of sun, but the parts of them that are shaded stay green. So once again, another plus for Thuja Green Giant. Watch out for root rot. Moving on. Okay, real quickly, I've got a small yew here. This is a regular Hicks Yew. It's a hybrid between the Taxus bacatta English yew and the Taxus cuspidata Japanese yew. And this one will have a very columnar growth pattern. But I just wanted to mention this. This is something you can find in most nurseries. I've got to trim the grass growing around it here on this one. But the regular Hicks Yew you find at nurseries, or sometimes you see it labeled Taxus media or media. It's a hybrid yew, and it's pretty shade resistant, although supposedly delicious to deer, so watch out for that. Alright, this is the straight species Japanese yew, Taxus cuspidata, and I think this one has a much superior branching structure versus the Hicks Yew we just looked at, so I'll spend a little bit more time talking about this one. They're very pest resistant. You shouldn't have any disease problems with yew. The Taxus cuspidata is supposed to be pretty pyramidal in growth pattern, but you can see here when I got it, I had to cut off some multi-stem trunks, and there's some lower branches here that I'll eventually get rid of, but now I've got it narrowed down to this one main trunk, and since I've done that, it's established a pretty good growth pattern with lateral branches coming off at great angles and one single leader on the top, which is going to take over for the continued vertical growth. So I would say I'm pretty satisfied. Now here's some other little branches that want to go vertical. I'll just get rid of them. I won't let that happen. And see this one right here that wants to go vertical? Nope. I'll get rid of that, but leave the lateral branch in its place. So there's a little pruning involved with yew, but Japanese yew, Taxus cuspidata. This is the capitata cultivar, that's the name of it. But if you search for pyramidal yew, I think you'll get what you need. I found this on naturehills.com. I think they still have it. Nature Hills Nursery. A great option for shade. Okay, a classic conifer for shady spaces is the hemlock. And the native hemlock for the eastern US is the Tsuga canadensis, or Canadian hemlock. But as I'm sure you may be aware of, or you've heard me mention, there is a foreign pathogen currently affecting those trees, the hemlock woolly adelgid, which was imported from Eastern Asia, and it's killing almost all of the hemlocks in the eastern United States. So what does one do in that situation? Well, there's a couple options. One would be to get hemlocks from the western United States. I believe that's, I can't remember the Latin name for it, but maybe it's Tsuga diversifolia, not sure, that could be Japanese. Anyway, there's western hemlocks, you have to look it up, but maybe avoid them anyway, because I've read online that they do not do well with heat and humidity because the Pacific Northwest is not that hot and humid in the summer. It's cooler and drier. So you want a hemlock that can handle heat and humidity, but is also resistant to the hemlock woolly adelgid bug, and that's why I have here in front of you the Chinese hemlock. Now there are a couple other options. The Tsuga Seabold's hemlock from southern Japan, and whatever the regular Japanese hemlock from Japan is, I think that is Tsuga diversifolia. If you can get those would do well also, but in my opinion, Chinese hemlock is the best because it's probably the most heat tolerant. And it is 100% resistant to the hemlock woolly adelgid. I found this one from orientalgardensupply.com, but if you really want to find a Chinese hemlock, you're going to have to scour the internet in search of one because they are not easy to find. Okay, in terms of pine, usually pine is pretty dependent on sun, and in general you will not find many pines that are shade tolerant. But supposedly this one is. This is the spruce pine, Pinus glabra, from the southern United States. It grows much further south than Tennessee, in southern Alabama, Georgia, northern Florida, but can live in middle Tennessee. It can survive the winters here, as you see from this one in front of you. And it's put on a lot of growth. This is like a foot of growth in one summer here. So I'm impressed, and it's in a semi-shady spot. Pinus glabra. Real quick, here's a look at that Japanese plum yew that I got from wilsonbrothersgardens.com, and it's put on pretty good growth. Although I've noticed with all the plum yews, the central leader is the last to grow, apparently. I guess it puts on the side branches first. But if you really have a shady spot, I almost think that Japanese Plum Yew and Thuja Green Giant are your two best options. If it's super shady and you want broadleaf evergreen, the Akuba that I showed you would be the best.